Today's star is Michael Swaim from Cracked.com. How you doing today, Michael?
First, it's Swaim, which I think shows what a huge star I am.
Absolutely. Swaim.
Rhymes with lame is how you remember. I'm doing very well. How about yourself, Matthew?
I'm doing all right. So
wonderful.
I want to talk to you a little bit, first of all, about the website. Like, when I was a kid, I loved Cracked Magazine while everyone else was reading Mad around my entire town.
Sure.
But,
a rebel.
But around junior high, I stopped reading, and it wasn't until college when I found out about Cracked.com, and it was completely different. I didn't even really think it was the same thing until a couple... Like, when I first found out, I thought it was just something that stole Cracked Magazine's name, but I love it even more in the magazine now. But what happened over those 10 years where it went from just pop culture parodies to this website of, like, informative and humorous lists?
Well, I think we could be justly accused of having little in common. I mean, definitely, if you put them side by side, there's not a lot of common ground. But in my mind, what sort of provides that connection, and first of all, let me say, I've never had contact with anyone related to the original Cracked magazine. And I've said, Dan and I have both said this in several interviews, we'd love to talk to any of those guys. They're all great. But we never hear from them, and there's like there aren't really any Cracked reunions or anything as far as I can tell, or we aren't getting invited. But to me, it's just a generational thing. We have the internet, and we have this sort of celebrity culture, which certainly has always been with us, but it's really hit a peak, as far as I can tell, recently. And that's where we're needed. That's where the comedy is taking place. That's just the exciting place. And, a comedian is a comedian is a comedian in some sense. We just want to make jokes. We get off on making people laugh. So you just point us in a direction. And I think the new Cracked, aside from being very consciously the vision of Jack O'Brien, the editor-in-chief, and the whole editorial board, I think it also is formed by just the natural landscape of where we find ourselves. But when I look at those old magazines, and it's pretty cool because we've got this room at the office with all the old Cracked magazines, the thing that sticks out to me that we do have in common is just the dense intensity of joke. If you look at one of those panels, Simpson style, they have all the jokes on the signs and little things in the margins doodled, and I really think that's something that is at the core of what we do, and it's still there. And it's still very Cracked, is sort of this Marx Brothers constant stream of joke. But it's interesting. It is interesting not being in print until now we've got the book out. And so that's sort of our first new venture into the printed word. And you'll notice that we're not trying to compete with what Cracked was, We're very consciously just trying new things and carrying on the banner. We'd like to think we're carrying on the spirit, but again, I have never talked to anyone from Cracked. Cracked Classic, let's call it.
Well, you brought up the book. The book's great. I've been reading it. I'm almost done it. What exactly did you have anything you were pushing the book a lot? Did you have anything to do with the book itself, or are you just, a fan of it, pushing it as an employee of Cracked?
Personally, I wrote 3 of the articles, 3 chapters, and I have 1 illustration, which is odd for me, but fun. And I got 2 bios, which was great. I get an illustrator bio and an author bio. But really, the book is so I was involved in that way. But the book is all Cracked contributors and Cracked editors. The Cracked editorial board, minus myself, did all the editing and the rewriting and the organizing, and all the illustrations are Cracked illustrators. We've got Winston Roundtree in there and Anthony Clark, Nedroyd, people who fans of the site will instantly recognize, and a lot of our favorite writers we got involved. And that's really a huge part of what we do at Cracked. We want to be the conduit and sort of the beacon and just the hot spot for the next generation of comedians. We want to give people opportunities to go from, as I did, as Dan did, and there's a dozen stories like this, just writing in your college dorm, sending in an article now and then, getting $50 or whatever. And now I work there full time and am on the editorial board. And we have people who started writing in the forums and now have book deals. So it's to me, the You Might Be a Zombie and Other Bad News, available everywhere, is just another extension of that. It's all the goodness that we have found at Cracked and all these great people on the forums coming together, submitting stuff, having it go through the Cracked editorial process, and bang, you got a book. It was a lot of fun and really cool to watch come together.
And I wrote a review recently on the book, and I even said, it's where it's funny, it also makes you afraid to leave your house in a couple of chapters.
Thank you.
How do you feel, making sure that people are visiting crack.com because they're terrified about being attacked by various animals outside of in their own backyard?
I wish that we were that Machiavellian. But I think it's more that there's a healthy chunk of us that are nerds who genuinely fear the outdoors, so it's a popular topic. No, but really, to me, the direction of the book and sort of the angle of the book is just what Cracked has been doing, essentially, which is showing you that the world around you is much more interesting and much cooler and weirder and often more dangerous and threatening than all the lies you've been taught by, either omission, history class in elementary school. All these things accrue, and Cracked is just sort of about finding those interesting, weird factoids that are absolutely true and verifiable that you can't believe. That's like our cross-section. That's where we like to hit.
Well, and while that's a big part of Cracked, I think another big part is the web shows that you guys have on there. And you've written at least 2 that I know of. There's probably even more, but Does Not Compute and After Hours were probably... After Hours is my favorite web show of all time, and Does Not Compute is pretty high up there. But
thank you.
What is the writing process of a show like After Hours? Because it's... If you've never seen it, to my viewers and listeners, it's such a smart idea of just taking what geeky people do anyway, sit in a diner and talk about pop culture, and turning it into 5 minutes of comedic brilliance, as far as I'm concerned.
Wow, thank you very much. We like to think of it as the opening scene of Reservoir Dogs if they just stayed there and no crime unfolded. Which is a great segue into the other tidbit I like to drop about After Hours, which is that it is shot at the table from the opening scene of Reservoir Dogs.
I never even know. I'm going to have to look at that.
Now to actually answer your question. I've actually only written 1 After Hours so far, although I'm privileged to be able to provide jokes for a lot. But After Hours in particular is very much It Takes a Village, because the topics, like you said, are these things that sort of come up organically when you're sitting around with your friends and you're all chatting. So we've had an open call basically to the Cracked team. So Soren Bowie has written an episode, Jack O'Brien has written an episode, Dan has written an episode. I've written the Harry Potter one recently was actually the first one I wrote. And the writing process is someone has one of these things, one of these After Hours things, which is pretty tough. That's actually the toughest part. Dan will come in and say, "Oh my God," or my favorite example is Soren comes in and says, "Oh my God, the 4 humors correspond to the 4 Ninja Turtle characters," which is an unreleased episode, by the way. That's coming up. But so he says, "Okay, I think I have a kernel of a Ninja Turtles episode," and when he can get enough things that fit to make an episode, basically we have the conversation. We sit in a room and we talk it out, and he takes notes, and then he writes a rough, and we come back and we talk it out again. And it's that whole thing, the writer's room approach, and it seems to work really well for After Hours. Whereas other series we've had, like Agents of Cracked and Does Not Compute, which you mentioned, are much more just, I'll take this episode, you take this episode, I write this, you get some feedback, etc. But After Hours is very cool because it feels very organic. The show is about what we are doing, We have that conversation and then we make it funny and film it.
Yeah, it just, because a lot of the web shows, and not just with you, most web shows nowadays kind of just seem like they're one step away from sketch comedy, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sketch comedy, I think, gets a little bit of a bad name, but there's been so many great sketch comedy groups, even within our generation of like The State and Kids in the Hall. But After Hours takes it to such a different level for me, and because I'm sitting there and I'm like, I've had this conversation before, and apparently so have you guys before you wrote the script.
Definitely, we hear that a lot, and I also have to say that of course the animators add so much. The whole thing is sort of pop-up video style. You got cartoons flying in and out to illustrate our thoughts, which is a very cool feature, I think. And again, those are all Cracked forum people and people, illustrators that have worked with Cracked in the past. We try to do a little of everything, I think. The wonderful thing about the internet is that there's no outline. There doesn't seem to be any compelling reason not to try really anything. I mean, as long as you're being vaguely appealing to some sector of the audience, you're good. So we've got sitcoms. I would call Agents of Cracked essentially a boiled-down sitcom. We've got a ton of sketch comedy, straight sketch comedy. I'd say that's really our bread and butter. But more and more, we've got these things like After Hours, which I guess is some kind of talk show. Does Not Compute is like a weird Tosh.0-ish thing, I would say, but I existed before him, just to get that out there. Yeah, so we really feel free to try everything, and I think that's how we chance upon these really cool, unique structures. And After Hours in particular was very much meant to be the video experience of reading a Cracked article.
Well, and it works though. The show to me has a lot of you get to know the characters that are clearly characters of yourselves to a certain extent, but you get to understand each one's role, and it almost plays out, in my opinion, like a better version of, say, Always Sunny in Philadelphia, because you don't fucking hate the 4 characters in After Hours.
Oh my god, I love that show though.
Yeah, it's a good show, but it's...
But yeah, those people are monsters, but they've readily accepted that. I think they've embraced that.
But it's a fun... I mean, After Hours is literally one of those things where I actually... If I see a new episode's up, I'm like, okay, I've been fucking late to work before because I was so excited that a new After Hours came up.
See, you don't realize, though, as soon as they leave the diner, they're rescuing dumpster babies and trying to pan them. They're really awful.
I believe it.
Katie and Mike are on cocaine most of the episodes.
Yeah, I mean, so did you, you did the Harry Potter episode. Is it safe to assume you're a big Harry Potter fan in order to do that, or did you really have to do a lot of research without knowing too much about it to put that together?
I think if you would ask the Cracked commenters, you would get a resounding, I know nothing about Harry Potter. But there tends to be some risk of that anytime with After Hours, because let's face it, we're making a show purporting to be experts about this topic to the point where we're like nitpicking things about it, to make the basis of the jokes. So you can't help but bring out the inner know-it-all in people. So I don't think we've ever had an After Hours. I'm probably the worst research-wise. I like to think I make up for it with funny. Like, that's my thing, is I just go for the jokes, being as funny as possible, and if I have to fudge that Slytherin is in a tower rather than a dungeon, I don't really sweat it. Many internet people sweat it a lot. But there are people better than me. I would say Dan O'Brien is probably the most scrupulous researcher. We definitely don't write about something that we don't have, at least we feel, some thorough knowledge of. But yeah, stuff gets by us, and nothing gets by the internet, so you'll find discrepancies.
Now, if any of my listeners are sitting there and going, I could write something for Cracked, can they, and how can they?
Absolutely. Everyone can, and we're always looking for writers. Basically, you just head over to crack.com, click on the forum button at the top, and find the Writers Workshop section. And you straight up just start pitching article ideas. You get feedback on articles. If an article gets picked up, it gets on the front page, and you get paid. It's a really good system. And everyone that's ever come through Cracked, or anyone you're a fan of that works at Cracked now, started that way or in some way similar to that, just cold submitting. And of everywhere I've been involved with comedically, especially online, Cracked is the widest open door. It's really easy to get in.
All right,
Otherwise, I wouldn't be there.
All right, well, thank you, Mike. The book is You May Be a Zombie and Other Bad News.
Yep.